Shalom. First and foremost, call halal yamla, Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem HaRachakwadash. Double honors to the apostles, the bishops, and the elders of Great Millstone that I learned this truth from. And also peace and salutations to the hopeful elect of the nation of Israel, scattered throughout the four corners of the earth. And in this video, I'm going to be going into the recent news that's been circulating over the past day or two. Okay, it was brothers have been doing videos on as well. Okay, recent news about the swarm of bees that pretty much appeared over the state of Israel. Okay, over a particular city in southern Israel, as you can see here on the screen. There's all kind of articles going into it. Al Jazeera, okay, different news platforms. Okay, bees in Israel sparking biblical prophecy theories. Okay, you always gotta have Esau coming with this whole a theory nonsense. All right, there's more articles going reporting on it as well. Okay, but that's one, and that's been one of the hot things that's been going on in the state of Israel over the past 24 hours. Okay, a swarm of bees, all right, buzzing or swarming over a particular city in southern Israel. Okay, and mind you, just some weeks ago or a few months ago, you had a swarm of crows that swarmed over Tel Aviv. Okay, as you can see here on the screen. All right, from the Google AI overview, it says in March 2026, viral videos showed thousands of crows swarming and circling over Tel Aviv, Israel, creating a dramatic, dark, and eerie scene above the city skyline, including the Azrieli Towers. All right. So just last month, you had a crows swarmed or encircled over Tel Aviv, Israel. Okay, which mind you, Tel Aviv, Israel, hosts the the biggest alphabet parade, all right, worldwide annually every year. Okay, and then now here we see a month later, you have a swarm of bees. Okay, that swarmed over a particular city in southern Israel. Okay, and as you have people on the internet talking about it, giving their opinion on it, giving their takes on it, doing what people on the internet usually do, right? They look at something that's controversial, and they give their their vain 2 cents or their vain opinion on it, right? But ultimately, we, the hopeful elected men of the Lord, okay, we ultimately go into the scriptures and give Yahweh Ba'ashem Shai's take on the things that we see going on throughout the earth. All right, because at the end of the day, as the men of the Lord, a major part of our job, all right, is to link the things that we see going on in the world to Bible prophecy. Okay, and feed the Lord's sheep. Okay, edify the Lord's elect. And show them that the words of Yahweh Ba'ashem Shai are coming to pass more and more in these outer days. Okay, and that the words of Yahweh Ba'ashem Shai are faithful and true. You see, but concerning this situation with the bees swarming over Israel, okay, we know, as the scripture speaks about in the book of Job, all right, that this is ultimately another major sign by Yahweh Ba'ashem Shai, amongst many major signs, okay, to us, the hopeful elect, all right, to let us know that, we're at the end of Esau's world, okay. This is Job chapter 12 and verse 7. It says, "But ask now the beast, and they shall teach thee, and the fowls of the air, and they shall tell thee." All right, now of course, we know we can't literally go up to an animal and ask an animal a question, or talk to an animal, okay, But pretty much when it says, but ask now the beast, it means what? Pretty much observe the behaviors of the animals throughout the earth. Okay, observe the behaviors of the animals. Okay, because the behavior of animals, shows signs of when a situation is in danger, or when things are calm and okay. Okay, or when there's danger, around the corner, so to speak, right? And in these recent cases of as of the past 24 hours, a swarm of bees flying over the state of Israel, and then just last month, a swarm of crows, all right, swarming over Tel Aviv, Israel. Mind you, crows. Okay, when you see a swarm of crows circling and swarming over a particular location, crows represent pretty much death, because crows, which is unclean bird, an unclean fowl, they feed off of dead animals, dead humans. Okay, they feed off of things that are dead, right? So crows, anytime you see a swarm of crows, all right, and even Esau shows that in his particular movies and TV shows and video games and whatnot. All right, where anytime you see a crow or a swarm of crows in a particular location or whatnot, or on top of a building, that usually represents what? That a dark scene or a dangerous scene is getting ready to take place within that movie or that TV show or that video game. Because what? Crows represent death at the end of the day. Okay, and that's a spiritual sign to us, the hopeful elect, from Yahweh Shema Shai, showing that the Lord is getting ready to bring great judgment and great death within the current state of Israel. You see that? And as it says again, Job 12 and verse 7, it says, but ask now the beast, and they shall teach thee, and the fowls of the air, and they shall tell thee. Okay? Or speak to the earth, and it shall teach thee, and the fishes of the sea shall declare unto thee. Who knoweth not in all these that the hand of the Lord Yahweh hath wrought this? Verse 10, in whose hand is the soul of every living thing, and the breath of all mankind. Because Yahweh Shema Shai is what controls, all of mankind, all the animals, the birds, the creatures in the sea. Okay, the heaven is the earth. All right, and anytime you see, so-called strange things happening either in the heavens or on the earth, various signs in the heavens, eclipses, planets lining up, right? Or, so-called strange behaviors happening on the earth, all right, especially, behaviors of the animals. Just know that that's Yahweh Shema Shai working, okay, in these outer days. That's the will of Yahweh Shema Shai being done according to prophecy, you see. And as it pretty much went into again, ask now the beast, and they shall teach thee, meaning what? Observe the behavior patterns of different animals, right? Sea creatures, birds, okay? Because all these so-called strange behavior patterns of animals that we've been seeing over these years, right? Squirrels attacking people, okay? Bees swarming over the state of Israel, crows swarming over Tel Aviv. All right, fishes beaching themselves, whales beaching themselves. Okay, birds dropping out of the sky, falling out of the sky and dropping dead. Right, all these different, strange behavior patterns from the animals that we've been seeing over these years, all showcase what? That that there's a problem in the earth. Okay, and that the earth isn't being managed properly. Okay, by the biblical Edomites who rule this current earth, starting with the elite banking families of Esau, Edom. Okay, so all these behavior patterns of the earth. All right, birds dropping out of the sky, bees dying, bees swarming over particular cities, crows swarming over particular cities. Right, whales beaching themselves. Okay, and I believe there's even a scripture that talks about the animals removing their place, roughly paraphrasing it. I believe it's in the Apocrypha. But all these things showcase what from the animals, that there's a major problem throughout the four corners of the earth. Okay, that the earth is being mismanaged. All right, by the by the biblical Edomites, so-called white man, starting with the elite banking families. You see that? And so, as we just saw, with these bees swarming over Israel, along with those flock of crows that swarmed over Tel Aviv just last month. All right, these things as well, okay, which is ultimately being done by the will of Yahweh Shema Shai. But these things ultimately also show as well that, okay, as the earth and nature and animals themselves are being more and more afflicted by this wicked rulership of Esau Edom, okay, the earth is fighting back against this devil, okay, as it speaks of right here in Job 20 in verse 27. It says, all right, this is speaking against the wicked Esau Edom, right? Okay, it says Job 20 verse 27, the heaven shall reveal his iniquity, and the earth shall rise up against him. You see that? So the earth, different particular animal species, right, and even weather effects. That's also another major thing that's associated with end time prophecy. Even as Yahweh Shai spoke of in the Gospels, earthquakes in diverse places. All right, the sea and the waves roaring. That all speaks to what? Okay, different so-called crazy weather patterns and crazy weather effects happening in these last days, right? Mass floodings in different places, okay, and as well literal earthquakes in places that don't normally experience earthquakes, okay, tornadoes, hurricanes, okay, dust storms and things like that, typhoons, tsunamis, okay. We've been seeing a bunch of all these different weather effects and earthquakes and hurricanes and whatnot, all right, over these years, and especially from 2020 up until now, okay, and it's only going to increase and it's only going to get worse. You see that? But at the same time, these different weather effects, hurricanes, floodings, tornadoes, volcanic eruptions, all right, and as well, the behaviors of different animals, okay, are all signs as well that the earth, little by little, is rising up against the wicked, okay, this wicked rulership of Esau Edom, okay, because Esau Edom, through his pseudoscience and his technology, all right, constant oil drilling, okay, going throughout the earth, bombing different lands, bombing different regions, going throughout the earth, pushing buttons and blowing shit up, right? That all these things have negative effects on the earth itself. The ecosystem, the water, the air, the atmosphere, okay, plants, trees, animal habitats, right? So in response, we've been seeing all these strange behaviors from the animals and from the earth itself, okay, as a sign showing us to the hopeful elect, all right, that have eyes to see and ears to hear, that all these things are as well signs of the earth itself and creation itself fighting back against Esau Edom, that's destroying the earth. You see that? And also, as the scripture says in the book of Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 5 and verse 20, it says, his severe wrath shall he sharpen for a sword, okay, going into the judgment of the Lord, right, through Yahweh Shai. It says, Wisdom of Solomon 5 and 20 again, his severe wrath shall he sharpen for a sword. All right, and according to Isaiah 34, who is the Lord's sword going to come down upon? Idumea, Esau Edom, all right, and the people of his curse, as it goes into in the book of Isaiah, the 34th chapter, all right. But as it says again, Wisdom of Solomon chapter 5 and verse 20, his severe wrath shall he sharpen for a sword, and the world shall fight with him against the unwise. See that? the world shall fight with him, all right, with Yahweh Shemel Shai, against the unwise. And who was the unwise? Esau Edom. Okay, Esau Edom, that unwise king that destroyed his people, that it speaks about in the book of Sirach, the 10th chapter. Where it talks about in an unwise king destroyed his people. We can clearly apply that to Esau Edom. Okay, the wicked that this earth has been given into the hand of, right? That this earth is being destroyed more and more and defiled more and more under the rulership of, all right, Esau Edom, the wicked. Okay, and as Esau has done nothing but go throughout the earth and destroying nations, weakening nations, okay, defiling the earth, drilling oil everywhere, defiling the water, defiling the air, cutting down trees, all right, destroying animal habitats. Little by little over these recent years, we've been seeing the world, all right, the earth itself, creation itself, fighting back against this devil Esau Edom, all right. And these two examples right here, bees swarming over Israel, okay, and crows swarming over Tel Aviv, are just small examples amongst many other examples of how the earth is crying out to Yahweh Shemel Shai and fighting back against Esau Edom. You see that? And that's all according to prophecy. Okay. Now I also want to get this as well. Let's go to the book of Exodus 23. All right, Exodus 23. All right, as the Lord was bringing our forefathers out of ancient Egypt, all right, through the wilderness, okay, through his via being us being led by the Lord's angel Yahweh Shai, right, as it says down here in verse 23, Exodus 23 verse 23, it says, for mine angel, okay, that angel that the Lord said his name is in, when you read up above, okay, that has the power to pardon transgression, okay, showing you that this angel also acted as a high priest, okay, and ultimately this angel that led us through the wilderness is Yahweh Shai Mashiach, okay, the same angel that visited Moses in a burning bush in Exodus the 3rd chapter, okay, that gave Moses those spiritual powers, with that staff, to bring those plagues upon ancient Egypt, right? Part the Red Sea, okay, that was the Most High, giving Moses that power and that ability through his angel Yahweh Shai Mashiach. You see that? And so Exodus 23 verse 23, it says, for mine angel shall go before thee and bring thee in unto the Amorites and the Hittites and the Perizzites and the Canaanites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, and I will cut them off. Okay, those are those different Canaanite nations, Hamitic nations, all right, that was dwelling in the Holy Land. All right, eventually before our forefathers got into that land and pretty much rooted them all out. Okay. And now when you jump down, I want to jump down to verse 27. It says, I will send my fear before thee, and will destroy all the people to whom thou shalt come, and I will make all thine enemies turn their backs unto thee. Verse 28, and I will send hornets before thee, which shall drive out the Hivite, the Canaanite, and the Hittite from before thee. So you see that? So one of the plagues that the Lord brought upon those Canaanites, right, that was inhabiting the Holy Land before our forefathers got into that land during the time of Joshua, was that the Lord sent hornets, okay, to plague those Canaanites, and eventually root them up out of that land little by little as you continue reading down in this chapter, okay. But the Lord sent hornets upon those Canaanites. Now, that's similar to this situation with those swarm of bees that swarmed over that particular city in southern Israel. Okay, it's similar to how the Lord sent those hornets upon those Canaanites. Now, of course, bees and hornets aren't the same, aren't the same bugs per se, but I'm just making a comparison, okay? Because like the scripture says in the book of Ecclesiastes, that which is then is now, okay? And that's why I believe hornets, just like bees, I believe are pollinators. Okay, they help pollinate plants and help plants with reproduction and things like that. I believe hornets are also pollinators as well as bees. But nonetheless, okay, with this swarm, this plague of bees swarming over the state of Israel, a particular region over the state of Israel, is similar to those hornets that the Lord sent upon those Canaanites. All right, to pretty much make way for our forefathers to get in that land. And you see, and even when you go into the book of Wisdom of Solomon, the 12th chapter, okay, what does it speaks of? Wisdom of Solomon 12 and verse 3, it says, "For it was thy will to destroy by the hands of our fathers both those old inhabitants of thy holy land," all right, the land of Israel, formerly known as the land of Canaan, okay, because that was the old inhabitants of that land before our forefathers got into there. And as it continues to read, verse 4, "Whom thou hatest for doing most odious works of witchcrafts and wicked sacrifices, and also these merciless murderers of children and devourers of men's flesh and the feast of blood." Okay, and guess what? Like the scripture says in Ecclesiastes, that which is then is now. Okay, the same things that those Canaanites and those different Canaanite nations that are listed in Exodus 23, just as they were doing all these odious works, all right, in the days of old, sacrificing children, committing cannibalism, drinking blood, okay, doing all forms of witchcrafts and sorcery and magic and left hand practices. Well, guess what? The same thing is being done in the Holy Land today under the under those small heads, okay, which are Edomites of the tribe of Amalek, okay, because when you go into it, those small heads, they lead the league when it comes to PDF philia, right? Children going missing, all right, drinking blood, okay, and not to mention they don't rule out of that land via the laws and the commandments. No, they rule out of that land according to the Talmud. All right, they believe in the Talmud. You see that? So they're in that land doing these same works. Okay, the same works that those Canaanites were doing in the land in the ancient times. Those small hats, okay, which are Amalekites, are doing these same exact works in that land to that very day. Okay, and so as we see, just as the Lord sent the plague of hornets upon those Canaanites, for these particular practices, for the same reason the Lord sent these swarm of bees upon those small heads. Okay, and of course it's not going to stop there, because we know ultimately the main plague that the Lord is going to bring upon that land, the state of Israel, is ultimately nuclear destruction. Okay, make that place utterly desolate, for it to ultimately be rebuilt back up. When we get back into that land under Yahweh Shai, okay, for the land of Israel, starting with Jerusalem, to serve as the headquarters of the kingdom of heaven. You see that? But again, that which is then is now. All right. So yeah, so just like the Lord sent those hornets upon those Canaanites before we got into that land, likewise the same thing with the Lord sending that swarm of bees upon those small heads, okay, before Yahweh returns and delivers the elect back to that land, our holy land, okay, the land that the Lord promised to our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, okay, to serve as the headquarters of the kingdom of heaven. All right. And let me get this. In Ezekiel 36 and verse 5, it says, Therefore, thus saith the Lord Yahweh, surely in the fire of my jealousy have I spoken against the residue of the heathen, and against all Idumea, which have appointed my land into their possession, with the joy of all their heart, with despiteful minds, to cast it out for a prey. So that's who's currently dwelling in the land of Israel today. Heathen, okay? Primarily Idumea, Edomites, all right? Amalek, which are the small hats. You got primarily Amalek, the small hats, okay, the so-called JEWs, along with those Palestinians, which are Ishmaelites, so-called Arabs, okay, dwelling in that land, okay, and as I said, which have appointed the Lord's land into their possession with the joy of their heart, okay, but what? With despiteful minds. All right, let's look up this word despiteful. All right, the word despiteful is Strong's H7589. It says sha'at, and it means despite, contempt. All right, let's look up the word contempt. Okay, the word contempt let's go to the New Oxford American Dictionary. It says the feeling that a person or a thing is beneath consideration, worthless, or deserving scorn. Okay, disregard for something that should be taken into account. All right, says also contempt of court, the offense of being disobedient to or disrespectful of a court of law and its officers. And that's ultimately how those Palestinians, which are Ishmaelites, and as well especially those small hats, okay, feel toward Yahweh Shema Shai. Okay, they look at Yahweh Shema Shai as an object of contempt. Okay, an object of something or someone that's beneath them, right, or worthless or deserving scorn, right? They're disobedient to Yahweh Shema Shai in His holy land, right? They don't believe the fear of the Lord is something that should be taken into account, right? They look at Yahweh Shema Shai with despiteful minds, as it read, okay, in the Lord's land. You see that? Because, and mind you as well, things like this, okay, what you see here on the screen, as well as, this right here, what happened last month, all this is also as well just another major sign, okay, that should show the world that these people that's in the land right now, calling themselves JEWs, or the chosen people, are not indeed the chosen people of Yahweh Shema Shai. They're imposters. You see that? So, these Christians out there, okay, they're still, especially these Edomite Christians, but, all Christians for that matter, any Christian that believes that those people in the land of Israel today are the chosen people, right, the true JEWs, okay, then you out of your damn mind, okay? You don't have this spirit, you don't understand the scriptures, you don't understand prophecy, right? And ultimately, Yahweh Shema Shai is going to destroy them. Okay, he's going to destroy these small hats that's in the land of Israel today, and as well any Christian, all right, especially any Christian that's still believing that these people are the chosen people of the Lord. You see that? These particular incidents are just two signs amongst many signs, okay, that the Lord is showing to show that these people are not the true JEWs and not the true chosen people. You see that? And as well, as we just read in Ezekiel 36, they rule in that land with the spiteful minds, right? Because what does the scripture say real quick in Isaiah 26? All right, let favor be shown to the wicked. Okay, Isaiah 26 and verse 10, it says, "Let favor be shewed to the wicked, yet will he not learn righteousness." Okay, and who's the wicked? All right, who's the wicked according to the Bible? Esau, Edom, pursuant to Malachi 1 verse 4. They're known as the border of wickedness. All right, yet he will not learn righteousness. Okay, because these Edomites, all right, starting with Amalek, the small hats, okay, and starting with their top ranking families, they will not learn the righteousness of Yahweh Shema Shah because they weren't created to be righteous. Okay, they were created to be the wicked, to ultimately do the bidding and the working of Satan on the earth. You see that? To fulfill wickedness on the earth, all right, to ultimately be judged by Yahweh Shai upon the return of Hamashiach Yahweh Shai in these outer days. You see that? And it says, Isaiah 26 and verse 10 again, let favor be shewed to the wicked, yet will he not learn righteousness. In the land of uprightness, what is the land of uprightness? The land of Israel. Will he deal unjustly? Okay, committing all kinds of genocide, atrocity, witchcraft, sorcery, pedophilia, okay, alphabet activity, all right, up there in the city of Tel Aviv, right? It says again, in the land of uprightness will he deal unjustly, and will not behold the majesty of the Lord. All right, these that whole state of Israel was not rooted in upholding the majesty of Yahweh Shema Shai. That land, that state was not rooted in governing the earth, all right, according to the laws and the commandments and the statutes of Yahweh Shema Shai. All right, that land, and even when you look at the future players of the small s right now, okay, they're going throughout the surrounding regions, Lebanon, Gaza, right, Syria, all to push the Greater Israel project, okay, to forge a left hand promise that was ultimately given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay, they're going around the earth claiming that they're Jacob, claiming that they're the chosen people, but they're seeking to fulfill the entirety of the promised land, from the river Euphrates to the river Egypt, okay, not through faith in Yahweh Shema Shai, but instead through the sword. Okay, they're seeking to take those lands little by little by the force of the sword, okay, which is their blessing. All right, the blessing given to Esau, Edom, to rule the fatness of the earth by way of the sword, right? Just showing you once again that those people that's in the land of Israel are not the true chosen people. You see that? In the land of uprightness, they're not dealing justly. Okay, continue to great rob and murder, destroy, bomb, commit genocide. All right, worship the Talmud. All right, and even here it is. You got many Christians still to this day, especially Edomite Christians, still believing that those people are the chosen people. Meanwhile, when you look up the statistics, about 90+% of small hats, okay, throughout the earth, don't even believe in the Messiah. You see that? But regardless of the fact, even if they claim to believe in the Messiah and this and the third, they're still the devil. Okay, and they're not the chosen people. You see that? And it says Isaiah 26 and 10 again, let favor be shewed to the wicked, yet will he not learn righteousness. In the land of uprightness will he deal unjustly, and will not behold the majesty of the Lord. You see, and these small hats as well are also at the forefront of this technocracy that we see growing more and more throughout the earth, especially here in America, Babylon the Great. When you look on the news or when you look on social media, you constantly see individuals like Sam Altman, Peter Thiel, Larry Ellison, okay, Alex Karp, which is the CEO of Palantir, right? And many of those names, if not all of them, okay, are small hats, right? And then not to mention, guys by the likes of Gil Bates, okay, Elon Musk, all right. All of these individuals that I just named are technocrats, okay. And they're going to be the ones that's going to be at the forefront of the technocracy that's going to be pushed throughout the four corners of the earth, and especially over here in the West, all right, here in Babylon the Great, okay. And that's all being done, okay, technocracy, the NWO agenda, the MOTB system, okay, that's all being done in favor of the small hats and the top elite banking families of Esau, Edom, which are all small hats themselves, okay, the Red Shield family, All right. So, in the land of uprightness, all right, the wicked, the small hats, Amalek, all right, which are Edomites, they're dealing unjustly. All right, and they're not beholding the majesty of Yahweh Shemal Shah, because again, as we read in Ezekiel 36, they're ruling in that land with despiteful minds. Okay, contempt against Yahweh Shemal Shah. You see that? Trying to establish their own left hand promise, their own left hand blessing, their own left hand birthright. Okay, and their own left hand kingdom. All right, after the vibration of Satan. You see that? The working of Satan. All right, but as it says in verse 11, Isaiah 26 and verse 11, Lord Yahweh, when thy hand is lifted up, they will not see, but they shall see and be ashamed for their envy at the people. See that? Because when it's all said and done, Yahweh Shemal Shah is going to make it manifest before the whole world who his true chosen people are, which are so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. All right, more specifically, those of us that are of the hopeful elect. Okay, those of us that are making our bodies a living sacrifice, working out our salvation with fear and trembling. Right, preaching this word, this gospel, this testimony throughout the four corners of the earth, standing stiffly for the name of Yahweh Shemal Shai. Okay, that's going to refuse to bow the knee to this beast system or the NWO agenda, or refuse to take the charagma, the MOTB, the microseed. You see that? When it's before it's all said and done, the Lord, as it's shameful spewing more and more upon Esau, Edom, and upon Amalek's glory. Okay, the whole world is coming up against the small heads, and all this is going to lead to Yahweh Shemal Shai making it manifest who his true chosen people are. Okay, which are so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, starting with us, the hopeful elect, the remnant. Lord will not be of their number. So it says again, Isaiah 26 and verse 11, Lord Yahweh, when thy hand is lifted up, they will not see, but they shall see and be ashamed for the envy of the people. Okay, the Lord's true people, right? It says, yea, the fire of thine enemies shall devour them. You see that? And that's what's coming ultimately, to Babylon the Great, and as well to the current land of Israel, the current state of Israel. Fire. Okay, these these swarm of bees right here, and the swarm of crows that swarmed over Tel Aviv just last month over there in Israel. Those are just a few plagues amongst many more plagues that the Lord's getting ready to bring upon at that current state of Israel. Okay, which is ultimately going to lead to the return of Mashiach. Well, we know the ultimate plague that the Lord is going to bring upon that land, that current state, is fire. All right, nuclear fire, nuclear missiles, hypersonic missiles. All right. So and so with that, Lord willing, this video was edifying, and until next time, shalom.